Growing up, I always knew I wasn't the favorite. It wasn't something my parents ever said outright. But actions speak louder than words, don't they? For as long as I can remember, my life has revolved around my younger sister, Chloe. She's the golden child, the prodigy, the violinist who, according to my mom, is destined to change the world. Me? I was just there, the afterthought. While Chloe practiced in her custom made soundproof room, I was in the kitchen scrubbing burnt pots. My mom said the practice room was an investment. My labor? Apparently, that was just expected. I worked 3 jobs after school, waiting tables, stocking shelves, and babysitting the neighbors' kids. Every penny I earned went straight into Chloe's lessons, competition fees, and her never ending collection of designer dresses. I can still hear my dad's voice echoing in my head, sharp and dismissive. Why are you so slow, Nina? He'd snap if dinner wasn't ready on time. If I dared to explain that I was exhausted from a double shift, he'd call me lazy. Once, when I forgot to iron Chloe's recital dress because I fell asleep on the couch, he slapped me so hard I saw stars. Your sister's future is more important than your excuses, he barked. Chloe never looked up from her violin when it happened. She never said anything. She didn't have to. She always got what she wanted. And I was just there to make sure her life stayed perfect. And my mom? She wasn't any better. One time I tried to stand up for myself. I was 14, already working weekends to help with the bills, and I had the audacity to ask if Chloe could pitch in. Mom grabbed my arm so hard I thought she'd break it. Don't you dare talk about Chloe like that, she hissed. She's our ticket out of this miserable life. You'll thank her one day. But Chloe's ticket out came at my expense. I wasn't allowed to have dreams or even free time. My life revolved around Chloe's schedule. Every waking moment was spent working, cleaning, or running errands for her. I missed my school dances, skipped out on study sessions, and never joined clubs. My classmates thought I was antisocial. Truthfully, I just didn't have the luxury to be a kid. Chloe, on the other hand, had everything handed to her on a silver platter. A car for her 16th birthday, private tutors, weekends spent flying to competitions in cities I'd only ever seen on postcards. And yet, she still complained. This isn't the one I wanted, she pouted once, holding up a brand new designer dress I'd worked 2 weeks to pay for. My mom told her we'd exchange it for something better. That's the thing about being in my family. You either serve Chloe or you're invisible. I've been invisible my whole life, but even shadows get tired of being stepped on. I always believed that one day I'd escape. It was the only thing that kept me going. This tiny, fragile dream of leaving everything behind and starting over. I couldn't rely on anyone but myself, so I started saving every spare penny. The money went into an old shoebox tucked under a loose floorboard in my closet. It wasn't much, just crumpled tips from waitressing and leftover babysitting cash. But to me, it was everything. Every time I slipped a bill into that box, I felt a spark of hope. It was my ticket to freedom, to college, to a life where I wasn't just Chloe's unpaid assistant. I'd count the money late at night when the house was quiet, the faint sound of Chloe practicing her violin in the distance. $10 here, 20 there. Slowly, it added up. I kept my little stash hidden like a treasure map, checking and double-checking that no one had found it. My parents rarely came into my room. They didn't care enough to bother, but Chloe had a habit of snooping. Once she borrowed my headphones without asking, and when I called her out, she rolled her eyes like I'd inconvenienced her. Relax, Nina, she said. You're not using them anyway. That's how it always was. Chloe treated the world like it revolved around her. To her, I wasn't a person with my own thoughts and dreams. I was just there to make her life easier. She never asked how I was doing, never thanked me for the hours I spent ironing her dresses or making her snacks when she was too busy to get up. One afternoon, I was on my knees scrubbing the kitchen floor when Chloe waltzed in, wearing a new dress Mom had bought her for her next recital. She spun around, beaming. "Isn't it stunning?" she asked, not really expecting an answer. "Mr. Gallagher says I'm the best student he's ever had. I think this might be the year I finally get noticed by the big leagues." I didn't respond. My hands ached from scrubbing, and I was too tired to fake enthusiasm. Chloe didn't seem to notice. She leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone. "You know," she said casually, "if I make it big, maybe I'll hire you as my assistant. You can carry my stuff, make my tea, that kind of thing." Wouldn't that be fun? Her words hit me like a slap. Fun? She thought I wanted to spend the rest of my life catering to her whims? I bit my tongue, afraid that if I said what I really thought, I'd lose my grip on the only lifeline I had, my savings. Instead, I forced a smile and said, "Sure, Chloe, that sounds great." But inside, I made myself a promise. No matter what it took, no matter how hard I had to work, I was going to get out. That shoebox under the floorboard was my lifeline, my one shot at freedom, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me. At least, that's what I thought. I came home that day feeling lighter than usual. My boss had let me leave my shift early, and I was looking forward to sneaking a few dollars into my shoebox. Every little addition felt like a victory, a small step closer to my dream. But when I walked into my room, something felt wrong. The loose floorboard in my closet was sitting at an odd angle. My heart sank. I dropped my bag and rushed to check. The shoebox was gone. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. My mind raced with questions. Had someone broken in? No, the house was fine. My family? No, they wouldn't. They couldn't. I stormed out of my room, my legs shaking beneath me. In the living room, Mom and Chloe sat on the couch, laughing at something on Chloe's phone. A shiny set of car keys dangled from Chloe's hand. "Mom," I said, my voice trembling, "where's my money?" Mom looked up, her expression calm, almost bored. "Oh, that," she said, waving a hand like it was nothing. "I found it in your room. You shouldn't have been hiding money from the family, Nina. We needed it." "Needed it?" I repeated, my voice rising. "That was my college money. I've been saving for years." She sighed, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "Chloe needed a new car for her competitions. You don't want her to look bad, do you?" Before I could respond, Chloe chimed in, jingling the keys. "Check it out, Nina," she said, grinning. "Brand new, top of the line. You should see the leather seats. Oh wait, you won't be riding in it, will you?" Her laugh was like nails on a chalkboard. My stomach twisted as the reality of what had happened hit me. All those late nights, double shifts, skipped meals, it was all gone. My dream of leaving, of starting over, had been ripped away and handed to Chloe on a silver platter. "Why?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "Why would you do this to me?" Mom rolled her eyes. "Stop being so dramatic. Your job is to support your sister. That's what we've always said. And anyway, it's not like you were going anywhere." That was when Dad walked in, taking one look at me and the scene before him. "What's all this noise about?" "They took my savings," I blurted out, unable to hold back anymore. "They stole everything I've been working for, and they spent it on her." Dad's face darkened. He walked over, towering above me. "Savings?" he said, his voice cold. "What savings? You live under this roof. You eat our food. Every penny you make belongs to this family. Do you think you're better than us?" "No," I said, my voice shaking, "but I deserve better than this." The slap came out of nowhere, sharp and stinging. My cheek burned, but the pain was nothing compared to the fury building inside me. "You don't deserve anything," he snapped. "You're ungrateful, Nina. All we've ever asked is for you to do your part, and you can't even do that. Your sister is the future of this family. You're just the support." Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them see me cry. "She's not the future," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "She's just a spoiled brat who's never had to work for anything in her life." Chloe gasped, clutching her chest like I'd struck her. "How dare you?" she hissed. "I've worked so hard for everything I have." "Worked?" I said, laughing bitterly. "You wouldn't last a day in my shoes." The room went silent. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd realize how much they'd hurt me. But then Dad pointed to the door. "Get out," he said, his voice like ice. "If you don't want to be part of this family, then leave. You're nothing but a drain on us anyway." I stared at him, my heart pounding. "Fine," I said, my voice steady. "But when I leave, I'm never coming back." Mom shook her head, muttering something about how ungrateful I was. Chloe just smirked, twirling her keys. I grabbed my bag, my heart shattering with every step. As I walked out the door, I heard Chloe call after me. "Good luck out there, Nina. You'll need it." I didn't look back. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking away. I was running towards something better. Or at least, that's what I told myself, as the tears finally spilled over and I disappeared into the night. The shelter smelled like damp cardboard and despair. I sat on the edge of a cot, hugging my knees as I tried to ignore the murmurs of the people around me. A woman 2 beds down muttered to herself, her words a jumbled mix of anger and heartbreak. A little boy clutched a threadbare teddy bear, his eyes too big and sad for his small face. I was one of them now. It hadn't been long since I'd left home. Days maybe, but time felt slippery here. My bag, stuffed with the few things I'd managed to grab, sat at my feet. It looked as tired and worn as I felt. The first night, I'd cried myself to sleep, curling up on the thin blanket like a child. But tonight, the tears wouldn't come. I was numb. The staff at the shelter were kind in their detached way, pointing me toward meal times and job boards. They didn't ask questions, which was a relief. I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone that my own family had discarded me like trash. How could I explain the hollow ache in my chest, the shame of knowing that even the people who were supposed to love me hadn't thought I was worth saving? But I wasn't giving up. Not yet. By the dim light of a flickering bulb, I scrolled through job listings on an old shelter computer. I'd been filling out applications for internships, though most required experience I didn't have or references I couldn't ask for. My heart sank every time I clicked submit, knowing rejection was likely. Still, I kept going. I needed to believe I could claw my way out of this. The next day, I woke up early and set out to hand-deliver resumes to a few places. My shoes were worn, and the soles rubbed painfully against my heels. I didn't have money for a cab or even a bus, so I walked for hours, my stomach growling from the meager breakfast at the shelter. At one office, the receptionist barely glanced at me before telling me they weren't hiring. At another, the manager smiled politely and promised to keep my resume on file, but his dismissive tone told me otherwise. By the time I returned to the shelter, my feet throbbed, and my resolve was hanging by a thread. I dropped onto my cot and stared at the cracked ceiling, wondering if this was all life would ever be. But even in my darkest moments, a spark of determination refused to die. I thought about the countless times I'd worked double shifts, juggling school and jobs to save for a future my family had stolen from me. If I could survive that, I could survive this. The next morning, I got up, brushed my hair as best I could, and slipped on my one decent outfit. My clothes might have been worn, but my spirit wasn't. Today could be different. It had to be. I wasn't done fighting yet. When I got the email from Vanguard Enterprises, I had to reread it 3 times to believe it. They'd accepted me for an internship. Unpaid, sure, but it was Vanguard. Everyone knew the name, a towering empire in finance and technology, a company where people started as interns and ended up running entire divisions. On my first day, I stood in front of the sleek glass doors of their headquarters, clutching my tattered purse. I caught my reflection in the polished surface and frowned. My blazer was secondhand, my shoes scuffed. I ran my fingers through my hair, trying to tame the flyaways. "You've got this," I whispered to myself, even though I wasn't sure I believed it. Inside, the building was a testament to power and money. Marble floors, state-of-the-art elevators, employees in crisp suits moving with purpose. I felt like a fish out of water, but I straightened my shoulders and walked to the reception desk. The receptionist, a polished woman with a nameplate reading Elise, barely looked up as she directed me to the 50th floor. "You'll be working directly under Mr. Cross," she said, her tone somewhere between impressed and pitying. "Good luck." Damian Cross, the CEO. I'd read about him in business magazines. Young, sharp, and ruthless. My stomach tightened as I stepped into the elevator. Why would someone like him waste time on a lowly intern? When the elevator doors opened, I was met with a sprawling office space that screamed efficiency. Glass walls separated offices from open workspaces. At the end of the hallway was a massive corner office, the door slightly ajar. I hesitated, then knocked softly. "Come in," a deep voice called. Inside, Damian Cross sat behind a sleek desk, typing on a laptop. He looked exactly like his pictures. Tall, dark hair swept back, sharp jawline, and eyes that seemed to see right through you. He glanced up, his gaze piercing. For a moment, I felt like a bug under a microscope. You're Nina? He asked, his voice crisp and commanding. Yes, sir, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He gestured to a chair. Sit. I perched on the edge, clutching my purse like a lifeline. He studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Tell me why you're here. The question caught me off guard. I want to learn, I stammered. I know I don't have much experience, but I'm hardworking and I won't let you down. His eyes narrowed slightly, scanning my face, my worn blazer, my scuffed shoes. It was as if he could see right through the mask I was trying so hard to wear. You'll work hard, he said, his tone flat. We'll see if you have the potential to match. He handed me a folder. Your tasks, don't ask questions, figure it out. I nodded, clutching the folder as if it were a lifeline. As I left his office, my heart raced. Damian Cross was intimidating, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of curiosity, maybe even recognition. I didn't know it yet, but that moment would change everything. I never expected Damian Cross to notice me, let alone follow me. It was late when I left the office that night, my feet aching after hours of running errands and trying to prove myself. The streets were quieter, and the shelter wasn't far, a small, rundown building tucked away in a corner of the city most people ignored. I kept my head down as I approached, hoping no one I knew would see me. But someone did. I didn't notice him until the next morning. Damian's assistant told me he wanted to see me, which wasn't unusual. I braced myself for more work, or worse, criticism. Instead, I stepped into his office and found him standing by the window, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Close the door, he said, his tone sharper than usual. I did as he asked, feeling my nerves spike. Is something wrong, Mr. Cross? He turned to face me, his piercing eyes locking onto mine. Why didn't you tell me you're living in a shelter? I froze, my breath hitched, and for a moment I couldn't form words. How did you? I followed you, he said simply, his voice firm but not unkind. I had a feeling something wasn't right, and I was right. Shame washed over me in a hot wave. I stared at the floor, unable to meet his gaze. I didn't think it mattered, I muttered. It's temporary. I'm fine. You're not fine, he said, his tone softening. You show up here every day, working harder than anyone else, but you look like you're carrying the weight of the world. And now I know why. I felt exposed, like he'd peeled back the layers I'd carefully built to protect myself. It's none of your business, I said quietly, but there was no conviction in my voice. Damian didn't flinch. It is my business. I see potential in you, Nina, but you're holding yourself back. If you keep bottling everything up, you'll break. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away. For a moment, the silence in the room felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. My parents, I began, my voice trembling. They spent everything on my sister Chloe. Her dreams were more important than me, my future, or anything I wanted. They made me work to pay for her violin lessons, her competitions. They even took the money I saved for college. I paused, swallowing hard. When I stood up for myself, they threw me out. Damian listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable, but his eyes soft. And now I'm here, I finished, my voice barely a whisper. I'm trying to make something of myself, but it's hard. Harder than I thought. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he stepped closer, his tone firm yet warm. You have the potential to be extraordinary, Nina. Let me help you see it. I looked up, searching his face for insincerity, but there was none. For the first time in years, I felt something I thought I'd lost. Hope. When Damian said he'd help me, I didn't realize what that truly meant. I thought he'd offer advice, maybe a few pointers, but Damian Cross doesn't do anything halfway. The first day of my training, as he called it, began early. He summoned me to his office at 6 a.m, coffee in hand, wearing a tailored suit that screamed power. I, on the other hand, showed up in my one good blouse and skirt, still rubbing sleep from my eyes. You're late, he said without looking up from his laptop. It's 5:58, I replied, checking my phone. He raised an eyebrow. The successful are always early, Nina. Remember that. And just like that, my crash course began. Damian didn't just teach me about business. He taught me how to think. Every session with him was like a mental workout. We covered everything from market trends and negotiation tactics to reading people's motives and leveraging weaknesses. Business is a game, he explained one day, pacing around his office. And you don't win by being nice. You win by being smart, ruthless when you have to, and always 3 steps ahead. At first, his words felt foreign, even harsh. But the more I learned, the more I understood. To survive in this world, I couldn't afford to be soft. I had to adapt. One afternoon, Damien handed me a stack of files. "You're going to negotiate with these suppliers." I blinked at him. "Me? But I've never—" "You're smart," he interrupted. "Figure it out. And remember, they'll try to intimidate you because you're young and inexperienced. Don't let them." I spent hours studying those files, learning every detail about the suppliers' businesses, their profit margins, and their previous deals. When I finally sat across from them in a sleek conference room, my hands trembled under the table, but I forced myself to meet their eyes. They underestimated me. That was their first mistake. By the end of the meeting, I'd secured a better deal than Damien had anticipated. When I returned to his office, he didn't say much, just nodded and handed me another task. But the slight smile tugging at his lips was all the validation I needed. As weeks turned into months, I changed. I stopped flinching at criticism and learned to deliver it without hesitation. My posture straightened, my voice gained weight, and my words carried purpose. Damien noticed, of course. "You're becoming someone people will fear," he said one evening after a particularly grueling strategy session. "Good. Fear is respect in disguise." Still, there were days when the weight of my past crept in. Damien had a way of sensing it. Once, after I froze during a role-play exercise, he leaned forward, his eyes sharp but kind. "What are you afraid of, Nina?" I hesitated, but then it spilled out. "Failing, proving them right, letting them win." He nodded thoughtfully. "Then don't. Use it. Every time you think of them, let it push you harder. Don't let them see you as a victim. Become someone they can't ignore." It wasn't just about skills. Damien taught me how to build connections too. He took me to networking events, introducing me as his protege. At first, I felt out of place among the polished, powerful crowd, but Damien's confidence in me was contagious. "Smile," he whispered once as we entered a room full of executives. "But not too much. You're not here to please them. You're here to be noticed." I followed his advice, shaking hands, exchanging business cards, and absorbing every conversation like a sponge. Over time, I started building my own network, forming alliances that would later prove invaluable. One day, after a particularly successful presentation to a group of investors, Damien pulled me aside. "You're ready." "For what?" I asked, still riding the high of the meeting. "To stand on your own, start something that's yours." The idea terrified me, but Damien believed in me. And by now, I was starting to believe in myself, too. I poured everything into my first venture, a consultancy firm aimed at helping small businesses scale. It was a modest start, but it was mine. I worked tirelessly using every lesson Damien had taught me, every connection I'd made to grow it. Soon people started noticing. My reputation in the corporate world began to rise, and with it, my confidence. One evening, as I sat in my sleek new office, reviewing contracts, I received a text from Damien. "Proud of you." It was a simple message, but it meant the world to me. Because I wasn't just Nina, the forgotten daughter, the scapegoat. I was Nina Torres, a force to be reckoned with. And I wasn't done yet, because as much as I'd achieved, one thought still burned in the back of my mind. My family. They had built their lives by tearing mine apart. But now, the tables had turned. It was time for them to see what I had become. I hadn't thought about my family in months. At least that's what I told myself. But the truth was, their voices, their faces, their cruelty, they lingered in the back of my mind like shadows I couldn't escape. As much as I tried to move forward, a part of me needed to know. Had they suffered even a fraction of what they put me through? To keep up appearances, I made no effort to contact them directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I relied on quiet observation and a few discreet inquiries. Damien had taught me well. You don't ask questions you can't handle the answers to, and you never tip your hand before it's time to play. The first crack in their perfect facade came from a simple internet search. I typed Chloe's name into Google, expecting to see the glowing headlines my parents always promised would follow her. Instead, I found a smattering of outdated articles and a single concert review buried on page 3. The headline read, "Once a prodigy, now a struggling artist." The article wasn't kind. It painted a picture of a young violinist who'd peaked too early and whose performances lacked the depth and maturity needed to sustain a career. My sister, the golden child, was floundering. I almost laughed. Almost. The deeper I dug, the more I uncovered. Chloe's social media painted a desperate picture, staged photos of her practicing, captions full of hollow motivational quotes, and comments from followers dwindling in number. But what caught my eye was a single photo of her holding a designer handbag, an item so ostentatious it practically screamed desperation. Where had the money for that come from? I started tracking their finances. It wasn't hard. My father had always been careless with passwords, and he wasn't the type to update them. With Damien's help, I accessed bank records that told a damning story. My parents had been borrowing heavily, using Chloe's stalled career as collateral. Loans, credit cards, even a second mortgage on the house. All of it painted a picture of a family drowning in debt but clinging to the illusion of success. But the worst was yet to come. While combing through old files on the shared family cloud drive, I stumbled across a folder labeled Scholarship Docs. Most of it was routine, application forms, acceptance letters, grant agreements. But buried within were receipts for expensive vacations, high-end electronics, and that designer handbag Chloe had flaunted online. They'd used the funds meant for Chloe's education to fund their lifestyle instead. And now, with Chloe's career falling apart, there was nothing left. The same parents who had berated me for being selfish had drained every penny for their own gain. As if that wasn't enough, I stumbled upon something even darker. One night, unable to sleep, I went deeper into Chloe's social media accounts, finding locked posts and private messages that revealed the truth of who she really was. Through screenshots and journal entries she'd shared with friends, I pieced together a pattern of calculated cruelty. "I don't feel bad," she wrote in one post about my savings. She thought she was better than me, always working like she was the hero. But she's just pathetic. Now she knows it. Another message read, "Nina was never going to leave. She doesn't have it in her. She belongs in the shadows. I did her a favor by putting her in her place." Every word felt like a slap. She'd known what she was doing all along. The stares, the money, the endless snide remarks. It wasn't sibling rivalry. It was malice. By the time I finished compiling everything, bank records, journal entries, screenshots, I had a mountain of evidence. Evidence that proved my family wasn't just neglectful. They were selfish, deceitful, and utterly devoid of remorse. I stared at the neatly organized files on my laptop, my mind racing. I could feel the weight of the betrayal pressing on my chest, but there was something else too, a simmering sense of resolve. Damien's words echoed in my mind. Don't let them see you as a victim. Become someone they can't ignore. For years, I'd been their tool, their scapegoat, their invisible daughter. Now, I had the power to turn the tables. The next step was clear. It wasn't enough to simply walk away from the wreckage they'd created. They needed to face consequences. They needed to know what it felt like to have their lives stripped away, piece by piece, until they had nothing left. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. They'd built their lives on my suffering. Now it was time to take it all back. When you've spent your whole life being overlooked, you learn how to move quietly. That's exactly what I needed to do now. My family had spent years treating me like I was invisible, and now I would use their indifference against them. The plan was simple, at least on paper. Create opportunities so tempting that they couldn't resist, then let their greed and desperation do the rest. The first move was Chloe. She had always been the star, the golden child, and now her fading career was the family's biggest liability. I reached out through one of the shell companies Damien helped me establish. Small, inconspicuous, and impossible to trace back to me. The email was simple. Miss Chloe Harper, we are a group of private investors interested in fostering young artistic talent. After reviewing your career, we believe you have the potential for a significant comeback. We would love to discuss a sponsorship opportunity. Please respond to arrange a meeting. It didn't take long for Chloe to respond. She replied within hours, her tone dripping with eagerness. Next came my parents. Their desperation for a financial lifeline was practically radiating through the screen as I monitored their bank accounts. The loan offer came from another shell company, one designed to look like a reputable lender. The terms were generous, unbelievably so. Low interest, flexible repayment plans, and no background checks. I knew they'd jump on it without a second thought. My father had always prided himself on being shrewd, but he never read the fine print. That would be his downfall. The final step was to create a sense of urgency. I wanted them to feel like they were being rescued, but only if they acted fast. For Chloe, it was a fake investor meeting scheduled in a lavish office space I'd rented for the occasion. For my parents, it was a limited time loan offer that expired in 48 hours. The countdown made them reckless. When the day of Chloe's meeting arrived, I was ready. I had hired actors to pose as investors, complete with tailored suits and polished smiles. Chloe walked into the room with the same confidence she'd always had, as if the world owed her everything. She had no idea she was walking into a trap. The actors pitched her a deal. They'd sponsor her career revival, fund her concerts, and cover all her expenses. In return, they wanted a controlling stake in her brand, including her likeness and intellectual property. Chloe, blinded by the promise of a comeback, didn't hesitate to sign the agreement. She didn't even read it. My parents' downfall was equally swift. The loan offer required them to sign over collateral, which included their home. Of course, they didn't realize this because they only skimmed the contract. The moment they accepted the funds, they were locked into terms they couldn't escape. I made sure the loan was just enough to cover their immediate debts, but not enough to solve their problems. They would still be drowning, but now with even fewer lifelines. Watching it all unfold was surreal. For years, I had been the one making sacrifices, the one suffering while they thrived. Now the roles were reversed. They had no idea I was behind it all. They didn't even suspect. The trap was set, but I wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning. I wanted them to feel the weight of their decisions, to understand the consequences of their greed and cruelty. And when the time came, I would be there to deliver the final blow. For now, though, I waited. Patience had always been my strength. And soon enough, it would pay off. I found Chloe in the music room of our childhood home, the place that had always been her sanctuary. She sat at the grand piano, idly pressing keys, her posture radiating a confidence that had once crushed me. It was ironic, really. She didn't have a clue that her entire world was about to crumble. I closed the door behind me. She looked up, surprised to see me standing there. "Nina," she said, her voice laced with a mixture of confusion and condescension. "What are you doing here?" I stepped closer, my heels echoing against the hardwood floor. "We need to talk." Chloe raised an eyebrow, her smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. What could we possibly have to talk about? I took a deep breath, the years of pain and betrayal swirling in my chest like a storm. "About the money you stole? About the years you and Mom and Dad spent using me like a mule so you could have everything you wanted?" Her face froze for a moment, but then she laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Are you still hung up on that? Honestly, Nina, you've always been so dramatic." I stared at her, letting the silence hang in the air until her smirk began to falter. "I know everything, Chloe. I know about the money Mom took from me to buy you that car. I know about the lies you told, the games you played to make sure I stayed small and you stayed the star." Her laughter disappeared. She leaned forward, her tone venomous. "Oh, please, don't act like some kind of martyr. You were always jealous of me. Admit it. You hated that I was better than you." I tilted my head, studying her. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or resentment. I felt something else entirely. "You're right," I said softly. "I was jealous. You had everything handed to you while I had to fight for scraps. But you know what? I don't hate you anymore. I pity you." Her eyes widened, and for a moment I saw panic flash across her face. "Pity me?" she spat. "Don't be ridiculous. You're nothing compared to me." I took another step forward, my voice as cold as ice. "You think I envy you? Chloe, your career is over, your reputation is hanging by a thread, and you don't even realize that the lifelines you think you have are nothing more than illusions. You're not better than me. You're just empty." Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the piano. "What are you talking about?" I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper. You've spent your whole life taking, but now there's nothing left to take. And without me, Chloe, you're nothing. Her confidence shattered in that moment, and I saw her for what she truly was, a scared, broken girl who had no idea how to stand on her own. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her in stunned silence. The power had finally shifted. This time, I wasn't the one left behind. The night was dazzling, filled with glittering chandeliers, murmuring crowds, and the hum of anticipation. Chloe's comeback gala was the talk of the town, an event to celebrate her return to the music scene after a hiatus. Little did anyone know the stage was set for a far more dramatic performance. I stepped out of the car, Damien by my side. The moment I entered, the room seemed to pause. Heads turned, whispers followed. Is that Nina? She looks incredible. I ignored the murmurs and kept walking, my heels clicking against the polished floor. My transformation was deliberate, a sharp, confident look that screamed power. Damien gave me a subtle nod, his calm presence grounding me. Chloe, draped in an expensive gown, was holding court at the center of the room, surrounded by admirers. She spotted me and froze, her smile faltering for a brief moment before she recovered. Nina, she said, feigning warmth as she approached. I didn't expect to see you here. I tilted my head slightly, a cold smile on my lips. I wouldn't miss it. This is, after all, a celebration. Chloe looked uneasy, but the crowd around us forced her to keep up appearances. As the event proceeded, I waited for my moment, watching Chloe bask in the applause of her supporters. When the crowd hushed for her to perform, I stepped forward. My voice, amplified by the microphone, cut through the silence. Good evening, everyone, I began. Thank you for coming to support Chloe tonight. But before we celebrate, I think there are some truths you all deserve to hear. The screen behind me lit up, displaying a series of documents. Financial records, contracts, and correspondences that laid out the full story of fraud and betrayal. The crowd gasped. These documents, I said, my voice steady, show how my family embezzled funds meant for Chloe's scholarships, competitions, and charity work. Instead, they used the money to fund their own lavish lifestyle. I clicked the remote, and more evidence appeared. Bank transfers, fake invoices, even a breakdown of how the stolen money was spent. Gasps turned into murmurs of disbelief. Chloe rushed forward, her voice shrill. This is a lie. She's just trying to ruin me. I turned to her unflinching. Really, Chloe? Because I have more. The next slide showed conversations, emails, text messages, and even a recording of Chloe gloating about her success at my expense. Her confidence crumbled as the crowd's disgust grew louder. Chloe, I said, locking eyes with her, you want to know the best part? The money your family borrowed to salvage their mess? It came from me. The room went silent. I let the words sink in before continuing. Every asset tied to your career, including the rights to your music, now belongs to me, legally. Chloe's face turned pale. You're lying! I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Check the contracts, Chloe. You signed them, remember? Desperate people sign anything. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The weight of her mistakes bore down on her, and the crowd began to turn against her. At that moment, the doors opened and police officers walked in. They approached my parents, who were seated at the front, wide-eyed and trembling. The lead officer began reading their rights, and the crowd erupted in whispers. Chloe looked around, her panic evident. Nina, please, she begged. Stop this. I tilted my head, a cold smile on my lips. Why? This is what you and our parents taught me, to fend for myself. As my parents were led away, my mother turned to me, tears streaming down her face. Nina, please, we didn't mean to hurt you. We're still your family. The room was in chaos as my parents were escorted out, pleading for forgiveness. Chloe collapsed into a chair, her face in her hands. But I wasn't done. I walked over to her, standing tall while she sat crumpled. You think I'm enjoying this? I asked, my voice steady. Do you think I wanted to become this person? Chloe looked up, her face streaked with tears. You're doing this out of spite. You're just as cruel as you think we were. I shook my head slowly. I'm not the one who pushed you down. You did this to yourself. I just made sure everyone else could see it. Chloe's expression shifted from desperation to anger. "You're jealous," she spat. "You always were. You couldn't stand that I was the star." I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. "You're right. I was jealous. I wanted what you had, a family that cared, a chance to follow my dreams. But now," I straightened, my tone turning icy. "Now, I pity you." My parents tried one last time to appeal to me as they were being taken away. My father's voice broke as he shouted, "We're your parents, Nina! You can't just abandon us!" I turned to him, my gaze unwavering. "You're not my family," I said, my voice calm and final. "You never were." The officers let them out, and the room fell silent. Chloe stayed behind, sitting alone in the chair. She didn't try to follow them. For the first time, she seemed truly lost. As I left the gala with Damien, the cool night air hit my face, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Damien looked at me, his usual calm smile in place. "How do you feel?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. "Like I finally let go of the weight they put on me." He nodded. "Good. Now it's your time, Nina." And it was. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running. I was walking forward, ready to see what came next. It felt surreal stepping into my childhood home, the place that once swallowed me whole with its suffocating walls and relentless misery. Now it was empty, quiet, lifeless. The furniture was gone, auctioned off to cover debts. The floors creaked under my heels as I walked through, memories flickering like shadows. This house, this monument to everything they valued, status, appearances, and Chloe, was mine now. It was poetic justice. My family had lost everything. Their assets, their reputation, their dreams, all gone. And I had taken it all back. I stood in the living room, where so many of my tears had fallen. Chloe walked in, her steps hesitant. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of her vanity and arrogance. For the first time, she wasn't draped in designer clothes or wearing her signature haughty smirk. "Nina," she said softly, her voice barely audible, "I want to talk." I turned to her, my expression unreadable. "What's there to talk about?" Her eyes welled up with tears. "I'm sorry for everything. I know I hurt you. I know I ruined things." "You didn't ruin things, Chloe," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You ruined me. For years, you let me suffer so you could shine. And you didn't just let it happen. You made it happen." "I was a kid," she cried. "I didn't know what I was doing." I laughed, but it was cold and bitter. "You were old enough to know when you stole my money. Old enough to know when you mocked me. You always knew what you were doing, Chloe." She reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back. "Nina, please. I want us to be sisters again." I shook my head, my gaze steady. "Some wounds don't heal, Chloe. I've moved on. You should too." She stared at me, her face crumbling as I walked away. I didn't look back. The next few months were a whirlwind. Damien and I expanded our ventures, entering new markets and dominating industries. My name began to appear in headlines, not as the tragic sister or the girl who lost everything, but as a formidable force in the corporate world. People sought me out for partnerships, for advice, for inspiration. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving, and I owed none of it to my family. Every step forward was mine and mine alone. The shelter was exactly how I remembered it. The same chipped paint on the walls, the same smell of overcooked vegetables in the cafeteria. But this time, I wasn't walking in as a broken girl desperate for a place to stay. I was walking in as someone who could make a difference. The director greeted me, her face lighting up with recognition. "Nina, I can't believe it's you." I smiled, shaking her hand. "This place saved my life. It's time I gave something back." We toured the shelter, and as I listened to her talk about their struggles, overcrowding, underfunding, limited resources, I felt a deep resolve. When the tour ended, I handed her an envelope. "This is just the start," I said. Her hands trembled as she opened it, her eyes widening at the number on the check. This is millions. It's for expanding the shelter, hiring staff, whatever you need. No one should have to feel the way I did when I came here." Tears filled her eyes as she hugged me tightly. Thank you, Nina. You're changing lives. I nodded, a lump in my throat. Walking out, I felt something shift inside me, a sense of closure. My pain had been transformed into purpose. As the city skyline stretched before me, I leaned back in the plush leather seat of my car. Damien slid into the passenger seat, his presence as steadying as ever. You've been quiet, he said, glancing at me. I smiled faintly. Just thinking. About everything, I replied. Where I was, where I am now, where I'm going. He nodded, his gaze softening. You've come a long way, Nina. I turned to him, my smile growing. So have you. We sat in companionable silence for a moment before I spoke again, my voice filled with quiet determination. You know, they tried to bury me? Damien raised an eyebrow, intrigued. And? They didn't know I was a seed. I looked out at the city lights, my eyes sharp and unyielding. Now I've grown into something they'll never touch. Damien chuckled, a low, approving sound. Here's to the future, Nina. To the future, I echoed, my voice steady and full of promise. The car began to move, the city lights blurring into streaks of color, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly free.